Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Earth Day. My name is Chris Praedel. I'm Executive Director here at Community Homeworks. We're so excited you're here to join us today for our first official guest of our Let's Talk Housing virtual series here that we'll offer every month. We'll ordinarily be meeting the first Thursday of each month. We're very, very excited today to be joined by the Honorable Vice Mayor Patrese Griffin of the City of Kalamazoo. And give you a little bit of an introduction here. So in addition to being the Honorable Vice Mayor of the City of Kalamazoo, Vice Mayor has many, many years in property management. She has been a ardent housing advocate, is now a member of the 53rd City Commission. And organizations that Vice Mayor has been involved with is Fair Housing Center of Southwest Michigan, has been a member of Shared Prosperity Kalamazoo, has been involved with TRHT, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, has been integral with Isaac's Housing Task Force, and much, much more, but also is the architect of the housing discrimination ordinance and reforms that happened here last fall with the City of Kalamazoo. So we are so excited to have you here with us today, Vice Mayor, and thank you for being our inaugural guest on the Let's Talk Housing series.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be your first guest. This is just going to be amazing and a great conversation. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And so just wanted to recap for everyone who's tuning in, why are we doing this? So Community Homeworks, we're a nonprofit organization based here in Kalamazoo, Michigan, predominantly doing work in the City of Kalamazoo in our core neighborhoods. And we work with our neighbors in the City of Kalamazoo who are income eligible, who might be having critical repair needs that are impacting the health or safety in their home. Our goal is to reduce housing insecurity and uncertainty with housing. And a lot of people don't realize that, as we describe sort of a ghost middle in housing, are people who are already homeowners and have unsurmountable repairs or repairs that are overwhelming beyond skill set or beyond the ability to afford. And those repairs might be all it takes to keep that homeowner comfortable and secure in their home. And so that's why Community Homeworks exists. But one of the other components that we're really proud of here at Community Homeworks as well is that we provide repair and maintenance education and really want to empower people to feel confident about what's going on in their home, and in opportunities where maybe it would be hundreds of dollars to hire somebody to do work, for people to be able to maybe buy a 25-cent part and be able to do it themselves and feel good about it. But even if we have somebody else doing the work in our home, to be able to understand what's happening and understand how to confidently hold those individuals accountable who are coming into our home is also incredibly important. And so we take education really seriously. So we're launching this Let's Talk Housing series because we want to use this as another resource. So when people call Community Homeworks and say, you know what, I just feel like I might be facing discrimination in my housing, or I have a major roof leak and could really use some guidance on what to do. I know you guys don't do those, but where do I go? That we not only can direct them to the right organization or to the right individuals, but we also can share these videos with those individuals so they can watch and learn a little bit more before they decide to reach out to our different partners in the community. And it's a great way to get to know the stars of housing like Vice Mayor. So anyway, so if it's okay, we'll get started here. The first question I wanted to ask you, Vice Mayor, is how did you become so involved and passionate in the housing space? I mean, what was the catalyst for you? How did that all begin?
So interestingly enough, I think the housing space for me started before I even had a choice. So my grandparents have owned property in this community for over 50 years. And I can remember being a child and fixing up the properties with them and cleaning up when people moved out. So before I even realized it, that was already a path for me. And then in my adulthood, I became I was property manager and became a realtor at one time. I became really passionate, though, through personal experience, personal housing crisis, the combination of that situation and having the knowledge that I had, and realizing that there were things that could be changed. There were policies, practices, and procedures. So that combination is what really just lit the fire up underneath me. And if it wasn't, I think that what really sealed the deal was the personal, the personal homelessness. That was something that, has really impacted my family heavily. So yeah, that combination is what got me into housing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, and just the reality of knowing that, that could happen to any of us. That could happen to any person of any circumstances in any neighborhood. That housing insecurity could happen to any of us, and that's just a great reminder of that, and recognizing that, really your passions is transforming systems, and so it's pretty exciting. In terms of, how you could just tell us about, like, how did your path happen to become vice mayor? What did that look like, and how did that come about?
That was a very interesting path. So my husband is an organizer, community organizer. So I would be with him and just kind of be more of a supportive role in the work that he was doing in different areas that I'm passionate about as well, outside of housing, just different social equity issues, social justice issues. But through that housing crisis, started working on a housing ordinance. And it was kind of that path that took me to getting on the city commission. And actually, a wonderful, wonderful attorney named Elisa Parker was the first person who asked me what I thought about running for office. And at that time, it was not something that I had ever thought about, not something that I'd ever considered. And then there was an opening. Former Commissioner Shannon Sykes left the district or left the city. And I applied for that and was able to be appointed, and then decided to continue to run to be elected. And so that is my interesting journey. So I say never, because you never know the path you might be on.
You never know. That's so true. So last September was a pretty special moment, in that path. You mentioned that the housing ordinance was, just sort of catalytic in towards of getting involved with city government. And can you tell us a little bit about, like, the passage of the housing changes and housing discrimination ordinance and reforms? Like, what did that change for the community? Like, what's different now than it was before that moment?
Absolutely. So that's a really, really good question. This housing ordinance is a step in the direction of barrier removal. So oftentimes when we discuss housing, it's about affordability, which is absolutely important, top priority. But alongside that are the barriers that people are experiencing when they're trying to get into housing. And as you lifted up earlier, people who are in housing, and the gaps that they have to stay in there. But even for the folks who are trying to obtain housing. So what was happening is barriers such as how people pay their rent, source of income. So for people who have housing vouchers or housing subsidies was an issue. People who had criminal backgrounds in our community, in our country, mass incarceration. And for those who aren't familiar with that, the United States makes up just about 5% of the population, but over 25% of the prison population. And so disproportionately, people are impacted. When you break it down even further than that, as it relates to criminal background, you have people of color, you have evictions, personal identification method. The Kalamazoo County has an amazing county ID program, but how that interacts with people obtaining housing, application fees. And so you had all of these barriers. And as it stood, and unless you strengthen the fair housing protections that are on the books, which is so appropriate. They're having this conversation during Fair Housing Month, which is in April. Unless you really tightened up on that and had an enforcement component, we were going to continue to see very little movement for people who are having difficulties getting into housing. And so thankfully, the 53rd Commission on September 8th, 2020 passed that housing ordinance. And what it does essentially is add additional protected classes for survivors of domestic violence, for criminal background arrest history, for personal identification method, and for your educational affiliation, whether you are not a student. It eliminates blanket policies that say you won't rent to people if they are have previous evictions or if they have criminal background. It also addresses application fees. In a nutshell, if let's say you take 10 applications in, and by the time you get to the third application, you've accepted that person and they're going to move in. Well, everyone else that you didn't, run their application, you give them their money back and let them know that they, didn't get the unit. And the final component, which is very important, is that enforcement piece, which is the Civil Rights Board, which kind of ties everything together, which for the first component is education, as you lifted up earlier, so important in these spaces. And then the enforcement for the other components as well.
Very cool. So for just so the public knows, the Civil Rights Board is up and running and has appointed all its individuals now, so people can, so if people wanted to learn more about that or, file a complaint or whatnot, how would they go about doing that?
Great question. Rights Board, yes, they are active. They meet the first Wednesday of every month at 7:00. And right now we're meeting virtually. And so you can look at the city's Facebook page or YouTube channel and you can watch it there. If you are a victim or feel that you have been a victim of discrimination, the city of Kalamazoo has made it very easy for you to file a complaint. You can call 211. You can also get on the internet and go straight to the city's website, which is kalamazooCity.org. And right there on the first page, it says there is a link for reporting a problem. And you can click on that and you can go right to filing a civil rights complaint. And even though the local civil rights board only hears cases that are surrounding our local protections, they will receive complaints on both federal and state and make sure those claims are given to the appropriate party, whether they be the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, Fair Housing Center of Southwest Michigan, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that and helping direct people where they go to if they do have an issue. And would you say, if people are in doubt, is it best just to, just check and make sure versus just thinking, well, there are no protections for me, or I might be, somebody this would apply to? I mean, what would you say to individuals who are kind of on the fence about whether or not they should lift up their issue?
That is a really good question. And I would encourage anyone who believes or thinks that they have been a victim of discrimination to file a claim. That is the only way that anyone is going to know. That's the only way that any investigation is going to happen. That's the only way to move a step further in that process. So by all means, please do so. Okay.
And what about, part of that equation are landlords, people who are renters. And, the vast majority of people who are in that field are not in the mega business. They might rent out a couple apartments or a home or, and the vast majority of those people are good people with good intentions and who want to take great care of the people who are their tenants. Irregardless, if a person is a landlord and is renting to individuals and they're concerned that they're making sure that they're following the right laws and procedures, or have any doubts about that, or maybe they're new to renting, what would you recommend for those individuals to make sure that they're doing their part and doing things correctly?
I would recommend that those individuals sign up for, if they have not already, fair housing training that's currently being offered by the city of Kalamazoo. There are, I believe, about 8 or 9 sessions that started back March 17th and will be running through June 10th.
Okay.
As well. So I would encourage anyone to sign up for that. That is going to be put on by the Michigan Department of Civil Rights and the Fair Housing Center of Southwest Michigan. Because as you said before, education is critical. A lot of people don't know what they don't know. And we do, for the most part, have, landlords and people who are in housing providers who do the right thing, who want to do the right thing. And for those who just don't have that knowledge and who want that, definitely take on that training. Everyone who is on the Civil Rights Board went through that training. And so, yeah, you can never get enough knowledge in this area.
For sure. That's great to know. And it's great that the city is offering those as well, and multiple opportunities for people to take part of that. So definitely, if you're on the fence or just want to make sure that you're following best practices, please sign up for one of those or reach out to the city to see if you can get more information on that as well. So COVID-19, we're now in month 13 or 14 of the pandemic, which is hard to believe. Here at Community Homeworks, we have seen that the pandemic on so many fronts has exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities that were already existing, but really exacerbated those. And for us, just to give you a kind of a perspective of what we're seeing, we are finding it's taking people who need critical services significantly longer to return all the paperwork. And when you think why, I mean, in addition to people wearing so many hats, struggling with employment, taking care of children and elderly parents, and just trying to keep themselves safe and, navigate this bizarre world right now. We know that people, when they need to get documentation or paperwork for applications like ours, we know that banks have special hours, City Hall has special hours, the county requires appointments, Social Security office, Secretary of State, everything is difficult to get to. For a long period, transportation was non-existent, and limited. We know that childcare is an issue for people when they need to get into those appointments and whatnot. So, it just exposed so much. And then in addition to the fact, like for us personally, there's a lot of people who, maybe should have called for help a little bit earlier, but didn't because they didn't want to have people in their homes. And you can't blame them for that. So, small problems turned into, bubbled up major problems. And so, I'm just curious, beyond, what we're seeing, I mean, what impacts are you seeing that the pandemic's having on the housing space here in Kalamazoo?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of the issues that were already, longstanding. People struggling to find safe, affordable, decent housing. People who are currently in housing, whether that be rental or home ownership, struggling to maintain safe, affordable, decent housing. And how to navigate all of that when you're just trying to hold on and keep your head above water. So it's been extremely challenging. I think people have been very resilient and very creative and shown extreme grace in trying to get through this and continue to get through these situations. But I just think it's definitely been difficult for families, for people, especially for those who are currently in housing situations. I found they're having some great challenges not wanting to, complain or say a whole lot about what's happening because they're afraid of retaliation. So there's just a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty that's happening. And hopefully, as we look to come out of this and as our community comes together, we can fill in some of these gaps for people. So, we're not leaving anyone behind.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I think the tricky part is I think in our minds, we just kind of keep thinking to ourselves like, oh, we just got to get through a couple more months until everybody's vaccinated. But the reality is that, this is probably the most significant, like seismic, sociological shift that we've seen in the last 100 years, certainly since like World War II. And so, we can't even say how this is going to impact society moving forward. I mean, everything from traffic to, how people work to how people learn and, and public safety and the challenges that stem from a pandemic. And so, I think housing is one of those ones too, where we largely, there's so much to be seen too, that we don't necessarily know. And I think to your point, like that just grace and that human resiliency is what's going to get us through that, and just being as proactive as possible for sure. It reminded me as well, that if people are struggling with rent or utilities, encourage people to reach out to Housing Resources Inc. as well. I'll give the number here really quick. It's 269-382-0287. or you can go to housingresourcesinc.org for help. And so it's a great resource. There are millions of dollars available that came down from federal stimulus that is there to help people who are struggling with rent or utilities, and that funding is available right here in our community from Housing Resources Inc. So encourage people to check that out as well. So leading to that next point as well is, what our team calls the endless referral loop. And we see it a lot of the times, and we have been really disciplined to try our best to make sure that when somebody calls Community Homeworks, that we just don't say, sorry, we don't provide that, next. Because we recognize that for a number of individuals, it is an exhausting path to try to find help. And especially the issue is that there is not an entity that can take care of it. And, I think of a couple examples. We've had people call about bed bugs. Who does that, right? Roofing resources. There's only so much roofing ability as in our community with our current capacity to help that, but it's a major issue. And so, we try our best to make sure that we're help people find where we can find resources, but there are times where we just have to acknowledge, like, there is no more, we don't have another place to turn to for people. What are your thoughts about, like, for us as a community, like, what would you say to people who are in that endless referral loop, but also, like, what do you think as a community is the solution to, like, making sure that there are not dead ends?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. That endless referral loop, and sometimes being so siloed. So I think it's really great of Community Homeworks that you all are trying to make sure that people don't fall into those gaps and those frustrating loops that they can fall into. I think from a standpoint in terms of the city and resources, I think that we can look for other dollars to fund some of the programs that we do so that they're less restrictive, and so that more people have opportunities to access some of these dollars. I think it's very interesting. One piece of feedback that I've heard from people is that the qualifications, right, that on paper, it seems like they don't qualify, but in real life, they are in need. And so how do we, close those gaps? I think that would be a huge way to help as well. One thing I did ask the city, because I felt like I was asking all the time, like, where are we sending dollars for this? And what about this? And what about that? So they put together a resource that's on the city's website. Now, mind you, this is just for the city of Kalamazoo, but it's kalamazooCity.org/home help. And that is a list of resources, all things housing, that people can look at and help streamline that a little bit. I still think there's a space needed for help, for advocacy. Because I think that's what people really need. After you've made 5 phone calls, you've heard 10 different things, you just kind of want to give up, and it's almost as if you need someone there to kind of help you get through that process. And so those are some of the things that I think would help. And then just acknowledging it like this, like you're doing now, and talking about it. I think that's huge, because that's how we start to change some of these things.
For sure. Yeah. And, with the new housing for all millage as well, there's a lot of potential in terms of maybe filling those gaps as well that exist, or potentially filling greater needs that exist as well. So hopefully we'll see how that shakes out with the county as well. I think to your point, it's like we see, it's like, if you're a person who is in the middle of January and your furnace goes out and you got 3 beautiful little kids that live in that home, at the end of the day, you probably don't care all that much about whether you live in a floodplain or whether you have a land contract home, or whether, you're back on your property taxes. Like, at the end of the day, we just need to get, help to people who need it and keep them safe and healthy in their homes. So I appreciate you lifting up and sharing that as well. So in your role as vice mayor, but both as a housing advocate, you're involved in just a number of organizations, but also get to see things from like the citywide perspective as well. What do you see as like the greatest challenges facing housing today in the city of Kalamazoo?
I think the greatest challenges is not to say that people aren't getting there, but not having a cohesive plan that looks at policies, practices, and procedures with an equity lens, and looking at the entire continuum from outdoor space to home ownership and everything in between. And I think adding to that, there is a slight tendency to be somewhat reactive instead of proactive, to things that we know have existed, to data that we have, to weather that we live in, right? So I think we are I believe that we're getting there, but I think that as a collective is causing us to misstep a little bit in some of the things that we're doing. But I know that the city as a whole, our community, is very resource rich. So I that's great, because other communities are not resource rich, and the problems that we're experiencing in Kalamazoo are not exclusive to Kalamazoo. But I definitely think that just with a few tweaks and adjustments, that we can get there and start to see some really huge changes. I mean, I think we're heading there. The huge housing ordinance that passed, that was a huge step, and I know there's a lot coming through the pipeline. Very creative ways to address these issues. So, it's frustrating to be in these situations, but I'm very hopeful at the same time.
No doubt. It's like former Mayor Hopewell used to say, we're a masterpiece in progress, and I always appreciated that, because we have a lot of to be proud of, but we have a long ways to go, right? I mean, and I think he does a great way of encapsulating that in that short statement. Do you see any current barriers that are particularly prevalent that you're finding that you think that we really need to make sure that we're figuring out how to tackle in the short term?
Yeah, I think something that you've already lifted up earlier is people who are currently in their homes and getting them access to, roof repairs on a grander scale than we already have. And some of those critical home repairs, I think that's going to be huge, because we do have an older housing stock in this community. And so coupling that with the barrier removal, so that people who may be in some of these older housing stocks, maybe they want to move out, maybe they have downsized, and how do we, rehab this housing stock at the same time providing housing opportunities for folks, who want to shift and move into other spaces. I think those are some pretty big barriers. And also, I think another barrier is for people who are searching for housing. We need some advocacy in that space, because it can be very difficult, similar to being in housing and trying to locate, where you need to go for resources. Trying to find the housing is very, very difficult. And even though you can have a subsidy, you can have financial assistance, actually securing it can be very difficult, time consuming, and a little frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. You had mentioned or alluded to this about the continuum, and we have the Continuum of Care here in Kalamazoo, and Sarah Jacobs, who recently started leading that organization now through United Way. But I know that they're very on the early stages as well, and part of that is taking the long-term proactive approach to tackling the challenges we're facing in housing. But where do you see us 5-10 years from now? Do you think we're on the right track? Do you think when we look back 5 or 10 years from now, we'll be like, wow, we went from being one of the communities that has struggled the most with figuring out our housing crisis to like the model? Or where do you think we'll be 5-10 years from now?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think we have the potential to set precedent. to be a leader. We're small enough to make changes that also it could potentially be problematic. But like I said, I think we have the potential to really change the trajectory of housing. And that starts with being honest about, the history, which I know that a lot of people have spent time on really explaining how we got here, and having a really good understanding of that and moving forward. So I'm part of the Continuum of Care. I serve on the allocations and accountability team, and I'm really excited about the intentionality that's happening at the Continuum, and in a way that I think we will achieve some of the things that we look to have happen, and not just focus on one particular component of housing, but really the whole continuum and how everything interacts. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see where we go.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, one thing I've observed or heard you loud and clear, which I very much appreciate, is that, we as a community and just people in general have a propensity just to think about the things that we see, not recognizing that there's so many things that we don't see that are still very integral to that whole pie of people who are facing, housing insecurity. And so, just being cognizant of that and knowing that that continuum of care is looking at that whole wide continuum of individuals is so vitally important, because, whether it be an individual that is technically houseless, but residing with a family member temporarily, that's not a permanent fix, or, living in their car, that's not a permanent fix, or, again, the person who is a senior who, has a major critical repair and, is basically to the point where they're looking where they're either going to, effectively have to leave their home for their health or safety or face condemnation of their home. Those are the people who, we don't see every day, but are here in our backyard. They are our neighbors. They're the people that we pass every day. And, they are just as in need as the individual that you see in a tent, that you drive by. So, I appreciate you lifting up that importance and making sure that we think about that and think critically about it. Remember that as well. So before we get to some fun questions, I was just curious if there's anything else that you wanted to make sure that we covered or that you thought was important for the public to know about what's going on or what you're working on or anything like that.
Well, yeah, I just want to share out with you all that I'm continuing to work with Isaac Housing Task Force and Truth Racial Healing Transformation to expand on the housing ordinance outside of the city of Kalamazoo. We've had several meetings and looking forward to expanding these protections outside of just the city of Kalamazoo. Even though our purview is just the city, our community is really what matters. And you can drive up the street and be in a different municipality, not even realize it. And you should really have those same opportunities and options and choices. So I'm really excited about that work that's continuing to happen. I just want to encourage everyone to, if you have not already, to check out our commission meetings that are the first and third Monday of every month. We do also have committee of the whole meetings now. Currently, we're looking to 2022 to find out our priorities and have our budgets aligned and really be intentional with that. And so as housing is very, very important, we just talked about that at our last meeting. You can check that out on Facebook or YouTube if you haven't already. And just really, I'm encouraging everyone to be engaged, to reach out to your elected officials, to leave comments if there's something that, has affected you or a solution that you have to something. The people that are closest to the issues are the closest to the solutions, but often the most under-resourced. So, I would just encourage everyone to lift up and to not stop. So thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. That's great. I appreciate you shining some light on those topics. So now a couple fun questions. We're going to just make this a mainstay of every guest that we have on each month. And so let us know how this goes. So person you most look up to. So this is like your hero Shiro of Kalamazoo.
Okay, this is a good one. I was having a hard time with this.
I know,
Okay,
right?
I was. Now I'm going to tell you, I was the child who, when I used to say my prayers at night, I thought I had to say everybody in a certain, like at the same time, because if I prioritize somebody over somebody else, oh, this was so hard for me. So there's not one. There's many, many people that I admire, but the two people that stuck out in my mind, and I'm going to say my grandfather and my husband. So my grandfather, Sam Brooks, is who I'm alluding to. He his work ethic. He and my grandmother, they owned homes and until she passed, but so much about who I am comes from him. And so I definitely look up to him. My husband, Ed Genesis, is a community organizer and activist. He is the first person that I watched be unapologetically himself and move through life without having to change that. And so those two people really heavily are who come to mind. So thanks. That was a good question.
That's awesome. I love that. If you could eat anywhere in the city of Kalamazoo, like if you were just like starving right now and you're like, oh, this is my place, where would you eat?
Oh, see, I was having such a hard time with that one because, oh my gosh, I love to eat. So that's just that. I do. But I think it really just depends because I can do anything from Zuruna to cookies to crow's nest. I just had martinis. So there's just
so much.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous. I don't expect this probably happens very often with you because you're always moving and always doing something. But if you had a day off, you and Ed had a day off, or if you just were like, oh, I'm solo today and I can just enjoy some time to myself today, how would you spend it in Kalamazoo?
Okay, that's a really good question. So I would start off doing a walk in Lacrone Park and getting my 3 miles in. They're doing some work for a splash pad right now. So I got to change my route up. But I would definitely do that. I probably would go get something to eat at one of those places that I named.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And honestly, I probably would just be outside, weather permitted, on my back porch. Or if it's cold and nasty or something like that, I'd be inside reading a book or watching a show. I'm finding different ways to enjoy, life as I find different things. So, yeah, I think that's probably how I'd spend it.
I love it. That's great. So, introvert or extrovert?
Ooh, okay. So I am reserved. And it's funny because I just was talking to my husband about this. I'm like, what am I? Because I feel like I'm kind of shy if I'm in a room. Like I don't talk a whole lot. But it's when I get to know you, then it's like, oh. But while I'm in the stages, I probably will be a little bit more quiet. So.
I like that reserved. It's like kind of a happy medium there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your leadership philosophy.
Ooh, okay. My leadership philosophy is this. And I got it, taking it from a cue from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you've said. People will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that is my leadership philosophy. That really grounds me and keeps me in a space where how I want to be treated. And so, yeah, that was these are great questions.
Hey, it's a great way for people to get to know the people who are leading our community. So complete this sentence. Kalamazoo is best at blank.
Ooh. Creating awesome, multi-talented folks.
I love it. The best kept secret in Kalamazoo is blank.
I don't know if it's a secret or not. So that probably wouldn't be a good question. I feel like there's like, wherever you go, you will find somebody from Kalamazoo.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's an attachment to Kalamazoo, like somewhere in there. And I don't care where you go.
Yeah. I'll never forget this. When I was a middle schooler at Hillside, we used to go over, there was a nursing home that was right down the street. And there was a gentleman who, grew up in racially segregated, like Mississippi. And, I'd go over and hang out with him once a week. And he usually it would be like you'd have Jerry Springer on or something like that. So, I'm sitting there watching TV with him, but we'd talk about life. And one time I asked him, I said, so, you said you're from Mississippi. How did you end up in Kalamazoo? And he said, you know what? He said, I was working hard my whole life. And I remember that when I was working outside, I would see a semi that would drive by once a week or a truck. And on the side of it, it would say Kalamazoo, Michigan. And he said, I didn't know where it was or what that community had, but he said, I promised myself that someday I was going to move there. And sure enough, he moved here. And I'll never forget that, to your point about Kalamazoo being everywhere. But I think that we are everywhere. We are changing the state and the country and the world, and we'll continue to do so. Vice Mayor, it's really an honor to have you here today. I have a Post-it note that's up on our fridge, and it says something very simple. It says, "Be the person you look up to," and you are one of those people for me. I admire you so much. I admire the way that you lead and the bar that you set. And it is an honor to serve with you on the commission. And we're so glad you're here with us today. And I hope people enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better and learning a little bit more about the great work that you've done, not just that you've talked about, that you've actually done and that you're doing and continue to do. So thanks so much for joining us today. And look forward to seeing you around town.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here with you all. It's always an honor to talk with you. It's an honor to serve with you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for educating our community. And I will see you all later.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we'll be back next month to learn about the Housing for All millage. So individuals can learn a little bit more about how that process is going to work and how people can provide input in that process. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today, and happy Earth Day.